I ought to expect to pay more. And if I am willing to pay more, I should be able to get what I want. So everyone does his or her fair share, but in a way that's most congenial to that person's own notion of what the good life is.
I'm sorry, did you answer the question about whether government should have a role in creating things like park space? I mean, yeah, if we get rid of Central Park, there would be a lot more room for houses up there.
There would, but I'm not in favor of selling Central Park.
But that's government regulation.
Excuse me?
That's government, you know.
Oh, I'm not against government providing these good things whatsoever. I think that there is a very strong role for government. I'm not reflexively against government. I think government certainly has very legitimate purposes, and government should strive to do those things and do them well. My concern there is that government treat citizens as adults and say, look, here's the kind of things that you could have through government, and here's what it's going to cost, and are you willing to pay for this in your tax money? If we want to have new parks, I think that's fine. There's an area not far from my house that was an old mill, and a restaurant was built on it, and it was several acres right in a prime area where the owners were going to sell out and close the restaurant and move away, and they wanted to sell to a suburb. And there were a lot of hue and cry to not allow that and to have the land be used as a lovely park instead. And I would have liked to see the lovely park. And the county decided they didn't have the money to buy it. And I think that's the way to approach it. If the county wants a park and taxpayers truly are willing to pay for this and it's a good amenity, then you go ahead and buy it out. If you're not willing to pay for it, the notion of, in effect, implicitly condemning it, which is what regulatory vagueness is all about, by saying, well, your land is zoned park, your land is zoned green space, and so therefore you can't build anything on it, but we're not taking it. I think that's dishonest. In short, I'm against trying to get something for nothing, because I think that distorts the relationship between government and its constituents and distorts the role of people in a democratic society.
Yes, Professor, so in essence what you're saying is we have to look at the whole capitalism structure for this to happen. You're saying so we can have so-called quote-unquote economically deprived areas. We have to look at the whole, how the structure of how capitalism operates in this country. We have to reorganize it and how it can, everything can be best distributed as evenly as possible. That's what you're saying, we have to look into that?
I'm saying that I have a great aversion towards passive constructions and vague reifications, which means economically deprived area. That's rather passive. Who is depriving this part of the country of its economy? Is someone taking away the Rust Belt's wealth? Is someone actually depriving somebody of something? That's a tougher question than saying this is a deprived area. And also, of course, I don't know if we're concerned about areas. I think we're concerned about people. I think if people are having problems, we ought to ask, are they having problems because others did something bad to them that's against the law? Were others simply not helping them? Were conditions where they're prospering not maintained for reasons having to do with things totally exogenous to themselves? Protectionism is a large part of this debate too. What if I were to say that I invented a new factory, and I'm putting my factory right on the Pacific coast, and people give me smaller amounts of money, and I give them wonderfully reliable cars? Well, I would get accolades for that, for producing this new kind of car, a lot cheaper. People are happy, they're satisfied, they don't spend as much money. People would say I was doing good. What if it turned out that I was a fraud? I didn't have a factory at all. There was no back end of my building, but boats would sneak up in the night and unload cars in another country. And we would sell these wonderfully reliable cars cheaper. Well, then that's terrible. That's taking away American jobs. That's taking away jobs in the Midwest. That's causing economic deprivation of areas. You know, we could think of it that way. I don't know if in the long run it's helpful to do that. So I always like to You know, Confucius, in Confucius Analects, Confucius talked about the concept of rectification of names. Unless you call things by their proper name, you can't understand them and you can't deal with them. And with due respect, I think lots of the business of people in the political realm today is not calling things by their right names. You know, we always want to pick a catchy name to call something, which isn't quite exactly what it is, because then you get people to support it. So again, rather than try to reinvent and retransform American society, you know, as a whole, by some overarching mechanism to try to deal with the fact that certain parts of the country are doing better than others, I would just approach this at a much lower level and find out why people aren't doing well and what problems they have. Housing, interestingly, turns out to be a big part of the problem there, because we have encouraged home ownership, I think, in this country much more than we should, because we've looked at home ownership as a goal that almost everyone should achieve, and yet it takes a certain amount of stability in one's life and a certain amount of capital in one's life to be able to afford a home. If my job is not secure, if I don't have much money, and I'm told to buy a home anyway, that makes it awfully hard for me to move and find a better job opportunity elsewhere. It makes it hard for me to ride out the inevitable dips in the housing market, some of which are bigger than others. It makes it harder for me to deal with repairs if I have to. The notion that everyone could just try to keep their head barely above water and we can live like that in the long run is a scary notion to me. And yet, one of the most scary notions to me is the fact that when we think of how evil and awful sometimes politicians are, reflect on this. They are thinking of ways to please us. And what they are doing is things that they believe we will support and vote for, even though we say we don't like them.
We have one final question.
I'll take it. Sure. What would you say is the best constitutional / takings clause private property argument against subsidizing low-income housing, if any at all?
I don't think there is a takings clause argument against it, because I think that Congress's power to tax historically has been different from government's power to take, which is we never think of imposition of a tax as a taking, because it's broader, and we have things like the Bill of Attainder aimed at preventing taxation from being aimed at a narrow group. I think the answer to your question lies in the General Welfare Clause. For instance, the notion is that the federal government can promote the general welfare, but my understanding of the general welfare is not something that swamps all the enumerated powers of the federal government. Rather, it's the welfare that particularly can be otherwise adversely affected in a federal system, and we need a federal remedy because it's a problem of a structural problem of national and local and state government. But problems that simply exist throughout the country, like schools, police, fire protection, just because they exist everywhere, in my mind, doesn't devote the General Welfare Clause, because those are quintessentially local issues. So I would keep that distinction. And I think a large part of the takings problem you're talking about really can be dealt with through that mechanism.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Professor Simmons for participating, and I'd also like to thank Professor Eagle for joining us this afternoon. The Federal Society has its next event next week on Tuesday evening at temporary 4 o'clock. We are having a debate on whether private school vouchers will benefit urban education. Once again, Clark Neely from the Institute for Justice will be joining us, and he will be debating our own Rutgers professor, Trachtenberg. And I'd also like to encourage you all to attend the Public Interest Law Foundation's Poker Night tonight at 6:30 p.m. Thank you very much.